The man is eating his own boot. Not the leather sole he ate that 3 days ago. Now he's chewing the wooden heel, his teeth cracking against the hardwood, blood mixing with splinters in his mouth. His name is Jean de Villiers. He's 23 years old, a Crusader knight, and in 6 hours he's going to make a decision that will damn his soul forever. But he won't be the only one. Welcome to Ash and Crown History. I'm about to tell you a story that will make you realize something horrifying. Throughout human history, more soldiers have died from starvation than from swords. And the worst part? Most of them died with food just miles away. This is the story of how medieval armies fed themselves. But it's also a horror story. Because when the logistics fail, when the supply wagons don't arrive, when the grain runs out, when commanders make one wrong decision, men don't just die. They transform into something else entirely. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Napoleon said, "An army marches on its stomach." And you'll learn why he was wrong. Because when an army's stomach is empty, it doesn't march. It devours itself. Let's go back to Acre. The year is 1291, and we're about to watch 30,000 men descend into hell. Jean de Villiers wasn't supposed to be here. 6 months ago, he was in Paris training to be a monk. His father, a wealthy merchant, had arranged everything. A quiet life, a safe life, a life studying scripture and tending gardens. But then the letter arrived. The Mamluks, the Muslim army that controlled Egypt, were marching on Acre, the last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. Every able-bodied Christian man was being called to defend it. Jean's father pulled him aside. "You don't have to go. You're not a soldier." But Jean had grown up on stories of the Crusades. Stories of Richard the Lionheart. Stories of knights in shining armor, defending Christendom against the infidel. He went. He arrived in Acre on March 15, 1291. The city was magnificent. Massive stone walls 40 feet high. A natural harbor protected by a seawall. Inside, 30,000 Crusaders, knights, soldiers, civilians, all confident that the walls would hold. The city was a marvel of medieval engineering. The outer wall was triple-layered, with towers every 100 feet. Behind it, a second inner wall. Behind that, the citadel. Military engineers called it the most defensible city in Christendom. Jean was assigned to the Tower of the Legate on the northern wall. His commander was a grizzled veteran named Sir Marcus, who'd fought in 3 crusades and survived 2 sieges. "Forget what you learned in training," Marcus told him on the first day. "In a siege, only 3 things matter: walls, water, and food. We've got the best walls in the world. The harbor gives us unlimited water. And the granaries are full." He clapped Jean on the shoulder. "We could hold this city for a year if we had to." The Mamluk army arrived on April 5th. 200,000 soldiers. The largest army the Crusaders had ever seen. Jean stood on the walls that first day, watching the enemy camp stretch to the horizon. Tents as far as the eye could see. Siege engines being assembled. Thousands of campfires lighting up the night. His friend Guillaume stood beside him. They'd met on the ship from France. Guillaume was 34, a veteran of 3 campaigns, with scars on his face and a limp from an old wound. "How long can we hold?" Jean asked. Guillaume didn't hesitate. "Depends on the food." Jean didn't understand. The city's granaries were full. Sir Marcus had shown him personally 3 massive underground chambers, each packed with sacks of wheat, barrels of salted fish, wheels of hard cheese, and crates of dried fruit. "We have enough food for 6 months," Jean said. "Maybe more." Guillaume spat over the wall. "That's what they always say." "What do you mean?" "I was at the Siege of Antioch in 68. The commander said we had food for 8 months. We were eating rats by month 3. Guillaume's voice dropped. "And by month 4, we were eating things that weren't rats." Jean laughed it off. This was Acre, the jewel of the Crusader kingdoms, not some backwater fortress. He was wrong. Here's what Jean didn't know about medieval logistics. In 1291, feeding an army wasn't like today. There were no canned goods, no refrigeration, no supply helicopters dropping MREs. There was grain, salted meat, dried fish, hard cheese, and prayer. A single soldier needed roughly 2 pounds of food per day to maintain fighting strength. That's 730 pounds per year. For 30,000 soldiers, that's 21,900,000 pounds of food per year, or 60,000 pounds per day. That's 30 tons. Every single day. Now imagine you're the quartermaster of Acre. You need to store 6 months of food for 30,000 people in a city that's about to be under siege. Where do you put it? Underground granaries. Massive stone chambers beneath the city, designed to stay cool and dry. Acre had 3 of them, each the size of a cathedral. Granary 1 held wheat and barley, 800 tons. Granary 2 held salted fish and meat, 400 tons. Granary 3 held cheese, dried fruit, and oil, 200 tons. On April 5th, when the siege began, they were full. On April 10th, the Mamluk siege engines opened fire. Jean had never heard anything like it. Massive trebuchets, each capable of throwing 300-pound stones. They fired day and night, a constant thunder that never stopped. The walls held. The stones would hit, crack the surface, fall away. Crusader masons would repair the damage overnight. But the noise was maddening. The constant boom, boom, boom. Soldiers couldn't sleep. Tempers flared. Men started getting into fights over nothing. And they were burning energy, constant stress, adrenaline, fear, which meant they were eating more. By May 1st, Granary 1 was empty. The quartermaster, a thin man named Brother Thomas, stood before the city's council. "We've consumed 800 tons in 25 days. That's faster than projected." "How much faster?" the Grand Master of the Templars asked. "We projected 1,600 tons for 2 months. We've consumed 800 in less than 1 month." The room went silent. "Are you telling me we have food for 3 months instead of 6? Brother Thomas nodded. "Maybe less. The soldiers are under extreme stress. They're eating more. And," he hesitated, "some supplies have spoiled." "Spoiled? How?" "The fish. The barrels weren't properly sealed. Seawater got in. We've lost perhaps 50 tons to rot." The Grand Master's face went red. "Find whoever sealed those barrels and execute them." "My lord, they're already dead. Killed in the bombardment 2 weeks ago." The commanders weren't worried yet. They still had 2 granaries left. And surely, the siege wouldn't last more than 3 months. The Mamluks would negotiate, or reinforcements would arrive from Europe. or something. But here's the problem with sieges. Hope is a luxury you can't afford. Jean felt the rations change on May 3rd. Instead of 2 pounds of bread per day, he received 1.5 pounds. Instead of salted fish 3 times a week, it was twice a week. It's temporary, Sir Marcus assured them. Supply ships are coming from Cyprus. This is just a precaution. Guillaume wasn't convinced. I've heard that before. He was right to be skeptical. On May 15th, scouts reported that a Mamluk fleet had been spotted off the coast. They were blockading the harbor. No ships could get in or out. Acre was completely cut off. The city's council held another emergency meeting. Jean, as a knight, was allowed to attend. The mood was grim. Maps were spread across the table showing the Mamluk positions. Red marks indicated siege engines. Blue marks indicated the blockade. We're surrounded, someone said. We can break the blockade, the admiral of the fleet argued. We have 20 war galleys. We can. They have 70, another commander interrupted. We'd be slaughtered. Then what do you suggest? Silence. Finally, Brother Thomas spoke up. We ration more severely. Cut everyone to 1 pound of food per day. Make the supplies last longer. 1 pound? That's starvation rations. It's survival rations, Brother Thomas corrected. It will keep people alive. Barely, but alive. For how long? Brother Thomas did the math in his head. At current consumption, with 2 granaries left, 12 weeks. Maybe 14 if we're careful. 12 weeks. 3 months. The room erupted. Some commanders wanted to surrender now, negotiate while they still had leverage. Others wanted to attempt a breakout, fight their way through the Mamluk lines. The Grand Master slammed his fist on the table. We hold. God will provide. But God had other plans. By June 1st, Granary 2 was empty. Now the real rationing began. 1 pound of bread per day. No meat, no fish, no cheese, just bread. That's roughly 1,000 calories. Less than half of what a soldier needs. Jean felt it immediately, the constant gnawing hunger, the weakness in his legs when he climbed the stairs to the walls, the way his vision would blur if he stood up too fast. But it was worse for the civilians. Women, children, the elderly. They'd been receiving smaller rations all along. Now they were getting half a pound per day. 500 calories. Starvation. Jean would see them in the streets, their eyes hollow, their skin hanging loose on their bones. Children crying from hunger, too weak to play. On June 10th, a child died. A girl, maybe 7 years old. Her mother had been giving the girl her own rations, slowly starving herself to keep her daughter alive. It didn't work. The girl died anyway. The mother's screams echoed through the city for hours. Guillaume was getting worse too. At 34, his body couldn't handle the deprivation as well as the younger soldiers. His hands shook. His hair was falling out. His teeth were loose. I'm fine, he'd say, waving off Jean's concerns. But Jean noticed how Guillaume would give away half his bread to younger soldiers. How he'd make excuses to skip meals. Guillaume was starving himself to keep others alive. On June 15th, a messenger arrived. A Genoese merchant ship had broken through the blockade. Not with supplies, with news. A relief fleet was being assembled in Cyprus. 20 ships, loaded with grain, salted pork, and dried fruit. They would sail within the week. The city erupted in celebration. Church bells rang. People wept with joy. They just had to hold for 2 more weeks. Maybe 3. The fleet would arrive. The granaries would be refilled. They'd be saved. Jean allowed himself to hope. He even smiled for the first time in weeks. The fleet never came. On July 1st, a captured Mamluk spy was dragged before the city council. Under torture, he revealed the truth. The relief fleet had left Cyprus on June 20th. 20 ships, just as promised. On June 25th, they encountered the Mamluk blockade. There was a battle. It lasted 6 hours. 19 ships were sunk. 1 escaped back to Cyprus. No more relief fleets were coming. The Mamluks had made it clear. Any ship that tried to reach Acre would be destroyed. The city was on its own. The council held an emergency meeting. Jean stood in the back, watching the commanders argue. Brother Thomas stepped forward. His face was gaunt. He'd clearly been giving away his own rations. We have food for 23 days. After that, we have nothing. 23 days. The room erupted. Some commanders wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to attempt a desperate breakout. A few suggested they could slaughter and eat the horses. We have 2,000 horses, one commander said. If we slaughter them, that's another month of food. The Grand Master shook his head. And then what? We've lost our cavalry, our ability to make a breakout. We'd be trapped, weak, and eventually still starving. Then what do you suggest? Someone shouted. The Grand Master's answer was simple. We pray for a miracle. There was no miracle. By July 10th, Granary 3 was empty. Every scrap of food in the city was gone. The official stockpiles, at least. Some wealthy merchants had been hoarding supplies in their homes. When the city guard discovered this, they confiscated everything. But it wasn't much. A few barrels of grain, some dried fruit. Why? They distributed it. Each person got an extra half-pound of bread. It was gone in a day. Now the horses were slaughtered. Jean watched as the stable masters led the horses out, one by one. These were war horses, destriers worth their weight in gold. Bred for battle, trained for years. Now they were food. The butchers worked quickly. 2,000 horses, killed and carved up in 3 days. The meat was distributed as fairly as possible, but 2,000 horses divided among 30,000 people doesn't go far. Each person got maybe 4 pounds of horse meat. It was gone in 2 days. Jean ate his portion slowly, trying to make it last. The meat was tough, stringy, but it was the first substantial meal he'd had in weeks. Guillaume could barely chew it. His teeth were too loose. I should have been a farmer, Guillaume said, trying to smile. At least farmers always have food. Not if they're besieged, Jean replied. Then I should have been a fish. They both laughed. It hurt to laugh. Their bodies were too weak. Now the real horror began. Jean watched the city transform. Watched civilized men become animals. First, they ate the dogs and cats. Every pet in the city was killed and eaten within a week. People hunted them at night, cornering them in alleys. Then they ate the rats. Soldiers would hunt them with clubs, roasting them over fires. A single rat could feed 2 men for a day if you were desperate enough. The rats ran out. Then they ate the leather. Belts, boots, saddles, harnesses. Anything made of hide was boiled until it was soft enough to chew. It had almost no nutritional value, but it filled the stomach, tricked the body into thinking it wasn't starving. Jean ate his belt on July 18th. He boiled it for 3 hours, turning the leather soft and gelatinous. Tasted like nothing, like chewing on wood soaked in rancid oil. But his stomach stopped cramping for a few hours. When he woke up the next morning, he vomited it all back up. His body couldn't digest it. Guillaume was dying. Jean could see it. Everyone could see it. Guillaume could barely stand now. His skin hung loose on his bones. His eyes were sunken deep in his skull. His lips were cracked and bleeding. On July 20th, Guillaume called Jean over. "I need to tell you something." Jean sat beside him. Guillaume's breathing was labored, each breath a struggle. When it gets bad enough, when the hunger is so intense you can't think, can't sleep, can't do anything but feel the pain in your gut, you'll think things you never thought you'd think. You'll consider things you never thought you'd consider. "What are you talking about?" Guillaume grabbed Jean's arm. His grip was weak, but desperate. "I was at Antioch. I told you that, but I didn't tell you what happened." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "We ran out of food. All of it. Everything. And the siege kept going. Men were dying. 10, 20 a day. Not from wounds. From starvation." "What did you do?" Guillaume's eyes filled with tears. "We did what we had to do to survive. And I've never forgiven myself." "Guillaume, what?" "The dead weren't dead anymore. They were meat. And we were animals." Jean felt his blood go cold. You didn't." "I did." Guillaume was crying now, full sobs that racked his skeletal frame. "I did. And I've carried it with me every day since. Every single day. I wake up and remember what I became." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because in 3 days, maybe 4, you're going to face the same choice. And I want you to know, whatever you decide, you'll have to live with it forever." Guillaume died on July 22nd. Not from violence. From starvation. His body simply gave up, his organs shutting down one by one. Jean held him as he went. Guillaume's last words weren't about God or heaven or redemption. They were about food. "Tell my wife, I'm sorry I ate her wedding gift, the salted fish. I shouldn't have, but I was so hungry." He'd been rationing supplies from home, eating them in secret while giving his official rations to others. Jean wept, not just for Guillaume, but because he understood now. This was how it ended. Not in glorious battle, but in slow, agonizing decay, in choices that would haunt you forever. And it was about to get worse. On July 25th, a rumor started spreading through the city. Someone had found meat, fresh meat, not horse, not rat, not leather, something else. Jean didn't want to investigate, didn't want to know, but he had to. He found the group in an alley near the old church. 5 soldiers huddled around a small fire. Their faces were smeared with grease. They were chewing. Jean walked over. "Where did you get that?" One of the soldiers looked up. His eyes were hollow, but there was something else there now. Something feral. something that wasn't quite human anymore. Does it matter? Jean's stomach turned. Because he knew. He knew exactly where the meat came from. The dead weren't being buried anymore. There was no one strong enough to dig graves, no energy to waste on the ritual. Bodies were just stacked in the streets, covered with cloth. Except now the cloth was being pulled back, and the bodies were disappearing, piece by piece. You can't. Can't what? The soldier snarled. Can't survive? Can't do what needs to be done? Tell me, knight, what would you do? Die with honor? Or live as a monster? Jean ran. He had to get away. Had to escape the sight, the smell, the horrible understanding of what was happening. But he couldn't run far. He was too weak. He collapsed against a wall, his vision swimming with black spots. And that's when he realized he was thinking about it too. About how long a human body could feed him. About which parts would have the most meat. About how he could justify it to himself. Guillaume had been right. The hunger changes you, twists you, makes you think things you never thought you'd think. Jean spent 3 days fighting the urge. 3 days watching other soldiers cross that line. 3 days getting weaker, his body consuming itself, burning muscle and organ tissue to stay alive. His teeth were loose now. His hair was falling out in clumps. His skin had taken on a gray, corpse-like pallor. On July 28th, he made a decision. He's not going to eat human flesh. He can't. He won't. Some lines can't be uncrossed. But he is going to do something almost as terrible. There's a group of civilians hiding in the basement of St. Andrew's Church. Mostly women and children. They've been there since the siege began, praying. And they have food. Jean knows because he saw one of them 2 days ago. A young woman carrying a small sack. She was trying to hide it, but Jean saw. They have a stockpile. Not much, probably, but something. Maybe enough to keep him alive for another week. He's going to take it, by force if necessary. Jean tells himself it's survival, that he'll die without it, that a knight's life is worth more than a few civilians who are going to die anyway. But he knows the truth. He's stealing from the helpless, from people weaker than him. And if they resist, he'll have to hurt them, maybe kill them. He finds 3 other soldiers willing to help. They're all in the same state. Skeletal, desperate, teetering on the edge of madness. They don't talk about what they're going to do. They just gather weapons and head for the church. It's midnight when they arrive. The city is silent except for the distant sound of Mamluk drums. A psychological tactic. The constant rhythm, never stopping, designed to drive the defenders mad. It's working. Jean leads the way down the stone stairs to the basement. Each step feels like a mile. His legs are shaking. From weakness or guilt, he can't tell. He can hear voices below, praying. The Latin words of the rosary, spoken in soft, frightened whispers. Jean reaches the bottom of the stairs. The basement door is old wood, barely hanging on its hinges. He pushes it open. 12 people, mostly women. 3 children, all under 10. They're huddled around a single candle, their faces gaunt and terrified. In the corner, Jean sees it. A sack. Grain. Maybe 20 pounds. Enough to feed him for 2 weeks. An old woman stands up. She's maybe 60, her face a map of wrinkles and suffering. "Please," she says. It's for the children. Jean doesn't say anything. He can't. If he speaks, he'll have to acknowledge what he's doing. He walks toward the sack. A younger woman, maybe 25, holding a child, steps in front of him. You're a knight. You swore an oath to protect the innocent. Jean's hand goes to his sword. The woman doesn't move. My husband died on the walls 3 weeks ago, she says. He gave his life defending this city, defending you, and now you're going to steal food from his daughter. Jean's vision blurs. Not from weakness, from tears. He's about to do it anyway. About to push her aside, take the grain, damn his soul, and that's when he hears it. Trumpets. Mamluk war trumpets. Different from the usual signals. This is the sound they've been dreading. The final assault. Jean runs. Abandons the grain, abandons the church, abandons his plan. He sprints toward the walls, his skeletal legs somehow finding strength. Behind him, he hears one of the women shout, "God protect you, knight!" The Mamluks have been waiting for this moment. Waiting for the defenders to become so weak they can barely hold their swords. Now they attack. 200,000 soldiers against 30,000 starving defenders. Jean reaches the walls. Sir Marcus is already there, barely able to stand but shouting orders. To your posts! Every man to the walls! The Mamluk army surges forward. Siege towers roll toward the walls. Ladders are raised. Thousands of soldiers carrying shields, swords, arrows. Jean draws his sword. It feels impossibly heavy. His arms shake trying to hold it. The first Mamluk soldier reaches the top of the wall near Jean's position. He's well-fed, strong, his eyes bright and clear. Jean is a skeleton in armor. They fight. Jean lasts maybe 30 seconds before the Mamluk soldier disarms him, the sword clattering to the stones. This is it. This is how it ends. But the soldier doesn't kill him. Instead, he kicks Jean's legs out from under him, moving on to the next defender. Jean lies on the wall, too weak to rise, watching the battle rage around him. The Crusaders are fighting bravely, fighting with everything they have left. But they're so weak, so slow. The Mamluks pour over the walls like a flood. The defenders fall back, fighting street by street, but it's hopeless. Jean doesn't remember much after that. Just fragments, images. Sir Marcus falling, 3 arrows in his chest. The Grand Master of the Templars, still fighting even as blood pours from a dozen wounds. The screams, the smoke, the taste of ash. He wakes up 3 days later in a Mamluk prison camp. He's one of 2,000 survivors out of 30,000. The Mamluks had won. The Siege of Acre was over. The last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land had fallen. Not because of superior tactics. Not because of better weapons. Because the food ran out. Jean spent 2 years in captivity before his father paid the ransom. He returned to Paris in 1293, entered the monastery of Saint Denis, and took a vow of silence. He never spoke about Acre again, but he wrote about it. In a private journal discovered in the monastery archives in 1687, 400 years after his death. In it, he confessed everything. The hunger, the temptation, Guillaume's confession, the moment in the church when he almost murdered innocents for a sack of grain. He wrote about the soldiers who crossed the final line, who consumed the flesh of the dead. And he wrote about the faces of the women and children in that church basement, and how those faces haunted him every day for the rest of his life. But the entry that stands out, the one that historians still quote, is this: "War is not won by the bravest soldiers or the sharpest swords. War is won by the man who controls the food. Because when the food runs out, brave men become beasts. And beasts will do anything to survive. I came to Acre a knight, pledged to God and honor. I left it barely human. The siege didn't take my life, but it took something worse. My certainty that I was better than the monsters I'd been sent to fight. Now here's the twist you didn't see coming. Remember the supply fleet? The 20 ships that were supposed to save Acre? They weren't intercepted by the Mamluk blockade. They were sabotaged by Venetian merchants. In 1847, a historian named Pietro Cassini was researching Venetian trade records in the state archives of Venice. He was looking for shipping manifests from 1291. What he found was something else entirely. A letter, sealed with the mark of the Doge of Venice, dated June 10, 1291. It was addressed to a Venetian merchant captain named Marco Contarini, who commanded a fleet of cargo ships in the eastern Mediterranean. The letter was brief. The ships bound for Acre must not arrive. The continuation of the Crusader presence threatens our trade agreements with Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil. Ensure the relief fleet encounters difficulties. Compensation will be generous. Discretion is essential. It was signed by Doge Giovanni Dandolo himself. Cassini published his findings in 1848. The revelation caused a scandal. The church denounced it as a forgery. Venice threatened to sue Cassini for defamation. But other historians began digging. They found more evidence. Payment records showing large sums paid to privateers in June 1291. Correspondence between Venetian merchants and Mamluk traders, discussing mutual interests. The truth became undeniable. Venice had a trade monopoly with the Mamluks. They bought spices, silk, and cotton from Egypt and sold them across Europe at enormous profit. If Acre survived, if the Crusaders maintained their foothold in the Holy Land, that trade route would be threatened. The Crusaders would want their own trade agreements. They'd undercut Venetian prices. So Venice made a choice. They hired pirates to attack the relief fleet, made it look like the Mamluk blockade. The ships were sunk. Acre fell. The Crusader presence in the Holy Land ended. And Venice's trade monopoly remained intact for another century. Jean de Villiers and 28,000 others died because Venetian merchants valued profit over Christian lives. The Siege of Acre wasn't lost on the battlefield. It was lost in a counting house in Venice where someone decided that spices were more valuable than souls. That's medieval logistics. That's the horror of supply lines. One decision made hundreds of miles away by people who never picked up a sword can doom thousands. Now let me tell you why this matters today. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. The Russian army was massive. 150,000 troops. Thousands of tanks and armored vehicles. Everyone expected Kiev to fall within days. Didn't. Why? Logistics. The Russian army's supply lines stretched too far, too fast. The plan was for a lightning strike, capture Kiev before Ukraine could organize resistance. But lightning strikes require fuel, food, ammunition, And Russia's logistics were a disaster. Fuel trucks got stuck in traffic jams. Convoys were ambushed by Ukrainian forces. Supply depots were hit by artillery. By the end of March 2022, Russian soldiers were abandoning their vehicles and walking back to Belarus. Not because they were afraid to fight, because they were out of fuel and food. Intercepted radio communications revealed Russian soldiers begging their commanders for rations. Some units reported going 3 days without food. Sound familiar? In May 2022, Ukrainian forces found a Russian supply depot that had been hastily abandoned. Inside were thousands of expired ration packs. The expiration dates? Some from 2015, some from 2002. The Russian army had been feeding its soldiers 20-year-old food. Food so degraded it was making soldiers sick. Same problem, different century. The logistics fail and the army collapses. Or look at World War I. The Battle of Verdun, 1916. The German army's plan was to bleed France white. To create a battle so brutal, so costly, that France would have to surrender. What they didn't account for was logistics. The only road supplying the French defenders was a single 2-lane route called La Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way. If Germany could cut that road, Verdun would fall. They tried. For 10 months they bombed it, shelled it, sent raids to destroy it. They failed. French engineers worked around the clock, repairing bomb damage, keeping the road open. Trucks ran in a continuous stream 24 hours a day. One truck every 14 seconds, carrying food, ammunition, and fresh troops. That road saved Verdun. The Germans never cut it. France held. And Germany's plan failed, not because of superior soldiers or better weapons, because of a road and the trucks that used it. The lessons Jean learned at Acre are still being learned today, still costing lives, still deciding the outcome of wars. Because here's the truth. Warfare hasn't changed as much as you think. Technology evolves. Weapons improve. We have satellites and drones and precision-guided munitions. But the fundamentals remain the same. An army needs food. An army needs fuel. An army needs a way to get supplies from point A to point B. And the side that can maintain its supply lines longest wins. At Ash and Crown History, we don't just tell you what happened. We show you why it matters. We show you how the lessons of history keep repeating, keep echoing across centuries, keep shaping our world. If you want more stories like this, stories that will make you see history differently, stories that connect the past to the present, stories that will keep you up at night thinking about how fragile civilization really is, subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because next time we're covering something even more horrifying. And tell me in the comments, what other medieval nightmares should we explore? The Black Death and how it destroyed a third of Europe? The Children's Crusade and the 30,000 children who marched to their deaths? The sack of Constantinople and the day the greatest city in Christendom burned? Your choice shapes what we cover next. But before you go, I need to tell you one more thing about Jean. After he returned to Paris, after he entered the monastery, he made a vow. Every day for the rest of his life he fasted. Ate only one small meal, no matter how hungry he got. When the other monks asked why, he gave them a simple answer. Because 28,000 men died hungry at Acre. And I survived. The least I can do is remember what they felt. But there's more to the story. In his journal, Jean revealed something he never told anyone in life. On July 28th, the night of the final assault, after he ran from the church, after he left the women and children with their grain, he went back. After the battle was over, after the Mamluks had taken the city, after everything was lost, Jean went back to St. Andrew's Church. He descended the stairs to the basement one last time. The grain was still there. The women and children were gone, either dead, captured, or fled. Jean took the grain, all of it, carried it with him when the Mamluks rounded up the survivors, kept him alive during his 2 years in captivity. He ate the food he'd almost murdered for, the food that had belonged to the children of dead Crusaders. And every bite, he wrote, tasted like ash and damnation. "I survived," he wrote in his journal's final entry. "But I am not sure survival was God's mercy. Perhaps it was his punishment, to live with what I became, to remember what I was willing to do, to know that given the same circumstances, I would do it again." Jean de Villiers died in 1320 at the age of 52. He was buried in an unmarked grave beneath the monastery. But his journal survived. And in it, he left us a warning that echoes across 732 years. Never forget that civilization is 3 missed meals away from savagery. I've seen it. I've lived it. And God help me, I became it. The greatest enemy is not the soldier across the battlefield. It's the hunger in your own belly. Because that hunger will make you betray everything you ever believed about yourself. Next time on Ash and Crown History, we're covering the biggest logistical failure in military history. Napoleon Bonaparte invades Russia with the largest army Europe has ever seen. 600,000 men. The finest military force ever assembled. 6 months later, fewer than 100,000 make it back alive. 400,000 dead. Not from bullets. Not from battles. From cold, disease, and starvation. This is the story of the Grande Armée's supply lines, how they failed, why they failed, and how that failure destroyed the greatest military commander in history. This is the march that broke Napoleon. Thanks for watching. This is Ash and Crown History, where the past is never boring, and the lessons are written in blood. See you in the next one.